Okay, so let me preface this video with a disclaimer that I'm not personally the biggest fan of the DC Extended Universe. I love DC superheroes, and there are a ton of DC film projects that I really enjoy, like the Suicide Squad and Wonder Woman, but I've never been able to fully immerse myself into the universe. That was until Peacemaker. This show blew me away and really has me excited for the future of DC films and television. And I'm not the only one, because the show is out here breaking HBO Max records. To celebrate Peacemaker's success, I'm thinking we go over 25 things you might have missed in this first season. You know, 25-ish things. Spoilers ahead if you aren't finished with the series yet. Filling the ambience of the show's fights to its comedic scenes all the way to its theme song, a good chunk of Peacemaker's soundtrack is composed of hair metal. The music is a subgenre of heavy metal with the influence of pop hooks and a more flamboyant aesthetic, which is probably a reason Augie Smith hated the music so much. Aside from that, it's safe to say that James Gunn's inclusion of a hair metal soundtrack greatly influenced the show's character. One particular nod to the subgenre was in episode 1, when Peacemaker unsuspectingly sleeps with a woman who turns out to be a butterfly. But in her life before she was taken over, we learned she was actually a huge fan of hair metal, with her collection of albums and her style, which is inspired by the fashion of other hair metal artists. Of course, even with their shared interests, she ends up viciously attacking our protagonist, but at least her attacks don't leave as much of a scar as that Bloodsport bullet. Speaking of which, in the same scene we can pretty easily see the bullet wound Bloodsport gave Peacemaker during the Suicide Squad. Located on the right shoulder of his neck, it's apparent that the defeat will be sticking with him for a long while. This isn't the only time it's visible either. Throughout different points of the series, this wound is there just as a way to remind us that Peacemaker's ideals, or past ideals after that finale, didn't always serve him well. Another nod to the Suicide Squad film was the inclusion of Gunn's in-universe superhero Ultra Bunny. In episode 4 of the series, a figurine of the character is shown on the dash of Vigilante's car. At first glance, this might seem like an odd, out-of-place bunny or even a reference to Bugs, since this is a Warner Brothers project. Which, I mean, the character could be, who knows? But really, the character was shown on a t-shirt that Rick Flag wears a majority of the Suicide Squad. At the end of the day, the character is a subtle way to add a bit of world building and continuity throughout the DCEU. I'm sure this is self-explanatory, but Peacemaker is full of references to the comics. I won't go over too many of those in this video because we actually have another vid on the channel that goes over all of the comic book references, so if you're interested in that, go ahead and give that video a watch. But in episode 1, while Task Force X makes Peacemaker take on Project Butterfly, he requests a jetpack to help in on the mission. Sadly, the other members swiftly decline, but his request is actually a reference to the jetpack he dons in the comics, so hopefully we'll get to see him actually use one whenever we see our hero next. One of the biggest reveals of the series was in episode 7 during the intense father-son confrontation between Chris and Augie Smith. While Augie continues to be the worst father of all time by listing the things he hates about his son, he reveals that Peacemaker is bisexual. Of course, this is just the first time it's fully acknowledged. It was also hinted at when he slept with both the woman he bonded with while running away from the cops and his third best friend Vigilante. It was hinted at again in the first episode of the series. During a desperate attempt to flirt with Harcourt, Peacemaker corrects himself after saying he hasn't slept with anyone in the past 4 years to saying he hasn't slept with any woman in the past 4 years. It was also hinted at in the Suicide Squad film when the character is bickering with Bloodsport over eating a bag of D's, in which Peacemaker responds he would eat a beach full of them for liberty. Fun fact, James Gunn attributes the decision to make the character bisexual to John Cena. In an interview with Slash Film, Gunn reveals that Cena improvised the character into a hypersexualized dude that is open to anything sexually. To add on to the point of John Cena's improv, one detail you wouldn't catch without knowing some of the behind the scenes is that more of Cena's improvised lines made it into the final cut of the show than any other actor on any other James Gunn project. In an interaction on Twitter, Gunn responds to a fan's question of how much John Cena's improv was included in the show, to which he replies that he used 2%, more than any other actor on any of his projects. Just goes to show that John Cena's talents definitely extend beyond the realm of professional wrestling. Episode 4 of the series features a scene where Peacemaker goes back to his childhood home to get more gear from his dad, who, unknowingly to Chris, has been arrested. Because of this, the house is pretty much peaceful, giving Peacemaker an idea of what life without his dad would be like. But in the midst of that silence the peace brought, we can hear a newscaster reporting on Charlie the gorilla who escaped the local zoo. In a later episode, he turns out to have been taken over by a butterfly, leaving Task Force X to take him down. But who exactly is Charlie the gorilla? There are many theories that he could be a reference to DC's Gorilla Grodd or Ultra Humanite, but I did a bit of digging and there's actually a gorilla named Charlie from the comics. In the 1966 comic Star Spangled War Stories number 126, DC introduced a Charlie Sergeant Gorilla who fought in World War II. While there's not any official confirmation that Peacemaker's Charlie is a reference to DC's obscure Sergeant Gorilla, it would make sense given all the other obscure character references throughout the series, and there are a ton of them. Peacemaker really doesn't shy away from these obscure references. Again, I'm not going to go too in depth here because our DC references video gives a deeper dive, but here's a quick list of characters that are mentioned or appear as some kind of Easter egg throughout the show. You've got Batmite, Eclipso, Dollman, Matter Eater Lad, who I'll talk about a bit more later on, Cerber Wuss, and Kite Man. But back to some more mainstream references. In the final episode of the series, as he kind of most terrifyingly drops Peacemaker's Sonic Boom helmet into the barn, he's the first to witness the Butterfly's food source, dubbed the Cow. As he sees it, he quickly realizes that Waller punished him by putting the poor dude up against another giant alien foe. And then as he paces away from the creature, he repeatedly says, "No more effing kaijus," a reference to when he called our old pal Starro a kaiju in the Suicide Squad. You know, I really feel bad for this man, especially as his character arc wrapped up and it turned out that he was just trying to be seen as much as Peacemaker. James Gunn may have also snuck in a few references to the MCU. Episode 6 included a raccoon as a part of Chris's plan to confuse his father's grunts. While this could be a coincidence, Gunn is known for forming a love for the animal after directing Guardians of the Galaxy, and he could have easily used any other small animal but chose to go with the raccoon. Then in episode 8, Chris is seen using a shield as a way to combat the butterfly horde, something he doesn't use in the comics. The decision to add a shield could be a nod to Captain America and Peacemaker basically being a more messed up version of him. Both are extremely patriotic, but while Cap is seen as America's perfect mascot, Peacemaker is definitely more rough around the edges like a shield. Just like the series is packed with obscure DC references, I'm sure you can tell by now that it's also packed with references to the Suicide Squad films, another of which is seen in the finale of the series where we've seen Economos return to Belle Reve prison, the place that holds all the Task Force X villains from the movies. He's going back there for work at the end of the episodes, so probably means that we're going to see more of this location in future DCEU projects. Another reference to the films can be seen all the way back in the series premiere. During his stay at the hospital, Peacemaker dumps out his personal belongings and we can see a postcard to Corto, Maltese, the fictional country in which Task Force X had to take care of Project Starfish. We can also see some Corto Maltese currency in which Peacemaker later attempts to use to pay his taxi driver. I mean, might as well grab a few souvenirs while you're being sent to your probable end, right? As you all probably could guess by his experience with superhero adaptations, James Gunn is a big fan of comic books. So much so that in episode 4 of the series, he includes a truck with the words Atomic Age, a reference to the atomic age of the comic book industry. This period of the comic book industry is defined by the Cold War and told stories that explored the threat of nuclear power. The time frame for this period is heavily debated, but generally the atomic age can be said to have taken place during the 1950s and 60s, which, going back to Charlie the Gorilla, was also when his comic was released, so kind of further adds to the evidence that Peacemaker's Charlie the Gorilla could be a reference to Sergeant Gorilla. I think we can all agree that Peacemaker isn't the kindest of DC characters. I mean, if murdering any and everyone who's in the way of peace, intentionally or not, didn't ring any alarms, you should probably get your morals checked. But we didn't come to this series for a Prince Charming, and Harcourt reminds us of that when it's revealed that his name in her phone is Dumb S in episode 2. Eagly, on the other hand, is a little bit more kind. Well, if he likes you, that is. Fun fact about Peacemaker's bird companion though is that he's voiced by none other than the talented D. Bradley Baker. Baker is known for playing a ton of cartoon creatures, so it's fitting that he got to play Eagly in Peacemaker. He's played Perry the Platypus, a good chunk of the gym monsters in Steven Universe, and Appa and Momo in Avatar The Last Airbender. Dude's got range. From Metropolis to Arkham, DC has some pretty well-known fictional cities in this universe. Peacemaker series also takes place in a fictional city called Evergreen, which originated in the comics as well. Evergreen first appeared all the way back in the 1957 Green Lantern number 53, and Peacemaker is the first time the city is featured outside the comics. Another display of Gunn's dedication to the source material. Even though he was dedicated to making some nods here and there to the source material, it wasn't his only influence for the series. Throughout the course of Peacemaker, Task Force X meets up at an abandoned blockbuster type store called Henenlotter Video. While at first this may just seem like a fictional chain store, it's actually a reference to one of Gunn's biggest inspiration, horror comedy director and writer Frank Henenlotter. Gunn made a name for himself in the horror comedy bubble with films like Slither, which also included an independent business named after Henenlotter. So it's safe to say that Henenlotter greatly influenced Gunn's style. Okay, last reference to the Suicide Squad, I promise. In episode 6, when the contents of the diary Adebayo planted are revealed, we see a photo of an eye covering a person's face, as well as an eye surrounded by blue. Since Starro is probably one of the most well-known one-eyed DC villains, these photos could be another nod to the Suicide Squad's alien enemy. Also, Amanda Waller oversaw the confrontation of Project Starfish, so it would make sense that she would try to frame Peacemaker as a conspiracy nut with the alien that they just took on. Here's a fun reference I'm sure a lot of you caught. The scene in episode 7 when Peacemaker is running away from his father's group of racist yes men is actually an homage to Indiana Jones' Raiders of the Lost Ark, in which Jones is escaping his enemies as well. Almost everything from the shot composition to the timing matches between these two shots. In this same episode, we get a dramatic standoff between Peacemaker, Vigilante, and the White Dragon. In a moment when all seems hopeless, Vigilante strikes a weak point in the White Dragon's armor and reiterates to Peacemaker that there's gaps. A discovery Vigilante made in episode 4 when the pair went to gear up and saw the White Dragon suit for the first time. You would think the dude creating all these weapons wouldn't overlook something as simple as gaps in his suit, but then again, racists don't really look past much, do they? The season finale's surprise appearance of the Justice League caught many by surprise. I honestly thought Adebayo calling for their help wasn't going to lead to any kind of payoff, but hey, I mean, Gunn proved me wrong. Unfortunately, the gang's not all there, with only Jason Momoa and Ezra Miller reprising their roles for the scene, while Superman and Wonder Woman appeared as silhouettes. At least those two were even in the scene. Batman and Cyborg weren't there, period, which James Gunn went on to say that there are reasons they aren't there, but he couldn't say why just yet. He had to keep that under wraps. Remember how I said I would circle back to Matter Eater Lad later on? Well, I just wanted to mention that Peacemaker isn't the first time the character is mentioned in the DCEU. In fact, Shazam director David F. Sandberg mentioned on Twitter that one of the powers that the hero tested was eating matter, which he failed, of course. The test was a reference to none other than the matter-eating character himself. Sandberg mentioned that he'd be interested in doing a film on the character as well, so don't expect these references to be the last we hear from him. Just a quick one, but why would that butterfly need to have slept with Peacemaker? I mean, unless it was eavesdropping and targeting him in the bar specifically to get his files, which, I mean, it probably was. But if not, and the butterfly just accidentally came across the files after they slept together, then why? I mean, I thought it might be worth getting you guys' thoughts on that. Anyway, next entry. Just like with Ultra Bunny being included in both the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, the DCEU is really stepping up its subtle world building game. One way they're doing that is actually behind the scenes by using fight choreographer Wayne Dalglish. Dalglish has worked on Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, Justice League, Wonder Woman, and now Peacemaker. The fight scenes of the DCEU have been one of its biggest strengths in my eyes, so it makes a lot more sense that one guy has been working on them. Last but not least, and this one's kind of a cheat, but I just like to let you guys know that Peacemaker Season 2 has been confirmed, as well as another DCEU series that'll be directed by James Gunn. The show was a hit, of course, so this isn't the last time we'll be seeing John Cena's character. There's also speculation that the next DCEU series will focus on Ratcatcher 2. I really hope we get that Ratcatcher 2 show. This one I will be very happy for.
Boy, I had a blast. Don't you just love John Cena? Well, I do. What were some of your favorite moments from Peacemaker? What are you looking forward to the most in Season 2? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, everybody, thanks for watching.